What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? We had a little trade deadline come to an end. I was waiting around all day, hope something crazy would happen. And I would say it was a lot of moves, but relatively mellow. The Commanders, I would say, make the biggest headline trade. The Cowboys make a controversial trade. The Lions do something that a lot of people thought they would do, get Za'Darius Smith. And we'll dive into should they have gotten even more aggressive over the two quote-unquote untouchable guys, but takes two to tango. And the Steelers make some moves. I was watching McAfee with Rodgers, and Rodgers is on with them when Mike Williams gets traded to the Steelers. Didn't look like he cared at all. So clearly Rodgers, never wants to take any credit or any blame for anything. He was ready to boot him out of there so him and Devontae and Garrett Wilson can get all the targets. It was one team that is lingering. I saw Rich Gannon today say the Raiders' job, and listen, this guy's tight to the Raiders. I think Antonio Pierce clearly in major trouble. Is that a Belichick potential spot? And I thought about it and want to dive into that. And then as we do every single Wednesday, we're going to go on campus because we had some stuff happening. USC makes a change, not the head coach. This actually might be Oregon's time. They've never won a national championship. Could this be the year? And then Bama LSU, always one of the games of the year. But obviously, before we dive into some football, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, Game Time. I would love, and I mean love, to go to Bama LSU. Anyone, if you ever get the opportunity, I've had so many friends that have gone to Bama games over the Saban era. Most of them are from California, and they said it's just an incredible experience. So you ever want to make it to one of these games, college, pro, basketball, college basketball's off and running, the NHL, you name it, they got you covered. Game Time, just download the app. You can search by price points. You can search by views. It doesn't get any easier to use, so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code John for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I love it when trades happen and people go, wait, you gave up this much for that guy? This guy went for way less. That happened a lot today. Because we'll start with the Dallas Cowboys because it was a pretty controversial trade. They trade for Jonathan Mingo, who is a wide receiver that most people are probably not, unless you follow the SEC, are going to know much about. He's played for the Carolina Panthers for the last year and a half. And when you play for the Carolina Panthers, you don't have as many eyeballs on you as if he would have been drafted by the Rams or the Ravens or something. But this guy was drafted 39th overall in the 2023 draft. 39th overall. He was a top 40 pick. And the Cowboys are getting crushed today because they traded a fourth-round pick for this player when other guys like DeAndre Hopkins, who just had 2 touchdowns on Monday Night Football and looks like he's clearly going to be a major addition to the Chiefs and has been one of the better wide receivers in the league over the course of his career, did not go for that much. And I think everyone gets so emotional. Like, this stuff isn't black and white. It's based on a lot of different factors. Obviously, age, but most specifically, contract status. And when you have a guy like Mingo, who was just drafted 39th overall, I pulled up his contract. The Cowboys owe him a little under $600K the rest of the season. Then they owe him $1.5 million. Then they owe him $1.9 million. He is under contract through 2026. And if he becomes a starting wide receiver for you over the next 2 years on a team that is very, very high priced, that is a valuable player. So the value in a guy who's on the market because clearly he's fallen out of favor. The GM that's there now didn't draft him, even though he was there. Obviously, the head coach had nothing to do with him, and he's fallen out of favor in the offense. Caught 43 balls last year, only has 12, and is getting lapped by the dude they drafted this year, Xavier Legette. But this is basic economics. You have to pay more for younger players. It's not that crazy that this guy, even though the chances that Mingo is ever as good as 32-year-old DeAndre Hopkins, let alone the prime version, obviously is slim to none. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about how cheap the guy is and how they just used a high pick. Now, if you want to nitpick the Cowboys, it's fair. Why are they so obsessed with their draft grades? Like, they are obsessed with, we had a high grade on this guy. We might have taken this guy at the end of the first. They did the same thing with Trey Lance a couple years ago. And they go, just because we had a high grade on him, we are willing to pay more than anyone else. Because clearly this guy was available. And a lot of teams, even shitty teams, should have been sniffing around on a guy if they had a high grade on this guy and he's available, because their fourth round pick might be better than the Cowboys. So it's like, if you think you're going to get a second round pick for a fourth round pick a year later, it's pretty good value. Like, every team in the league should have been interested. But clearly it's a massive red flag on when the least talented team in the NFL is getting rid of a guy, I don't care who drafted him, that just went in the top 40. Yet Jerry and his crew are always like, well, we had a high draft grade on him. We're willing, because they love trying to strike oil, finding value. They're like me trading stocks. I love it when a stock's down. But just because the stock's down and you can get it quote unquote cheap does not mean it's going to go back up. I've made that mistake many times, and I'll probably make it again. But Jerry just had this happen with Trey Lance. Just had this happen. And 2 years after giving a fourth round pick for Trey Lance, a pick that the 49ers used to get a starting safety, Mustafa, who's been awesome for them, Dak Prescott is now injured, can't play, and Trey Lance is not their starting quarterback. Why? Because he's not even their backup. It's been a disastrous trade. I understand you need cheap labor, and I'm not opposed to getting aggressive to get this player. But it's pretty telling that, like, you are the only team willing to go in this round again on a player now who's been in the league for a couple years or a year and a half. And I did some digging. Like, he's 6'2", 220 pounds. He's fast. He is very athletic and raw. But in terms of football, he's not like a plug-and-play player right now. Now he's young. And you could argue that this trade is probably more even about next year than it is this year, because there's going to be a new coaching staff and a new offense, but just get the talent involved. But why wasn't the rest of the league interested in this talent? So I listen, comparing it to the DeAndre Hopkins trade is stupid. Like, the chances DeAndre Hopkins is on the Chiefs next year is probably slim to none. Like, they're not even, they have nothing in common beside they both play wide receiver. He's an older player on a large amount of money contract, and this is a young player on a rookie contract from the second round, which many people in the NFL would tell you is the best value when it comes to contracts in the league. But I do think we have to question, like, are they too obsessed with trading for these recently drafted players who have come into the league and have some question marks quickly based on their draft grade? Like, that draft grade's somewhat irrelevant a year and a half later, 3 years later, like with Trey Lance. Just evaluate the player. Is it worth it? Because the one thing you'd say about the Cowboys is, like, they've drafted pretty well over the years. That's not their problem. And now they're just giving up a fourth round pick where, like, look how their season's going. They're going to draft high in a lot of rounds. That could be a rotation player for them next year on a contract that starts in 2025. So it's Jerry being Jerry. I mean, it's pretty crazy. I understand it. Unlike, I feel like a lot of people that cover and follow and talk about football that I've seen their takes on the internet. I just think, like, why are they so willing constantly to overbid on guys like this? And the Commanders, like, I was texting a buddy on the Chiefs, and I basically asked them, like, are you guys ever going to lose again? what a great life they have right now. They just never lose. And it was clear, like, the Chiefs were very, very interested in Marshon Lattimore from the Saints, who once upon a time, before a bunch of injuries, and this is a guy that was injured in 22 and injured in 23 and has been banged up this year, was easily one of the best corners in the league. He's been to countless Pro Bowls, and he's just a high-end player. Excellent draft pick, back in the day by Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis. But if you're the Chiefs and you have a really, really high-priced quarterback and obviously a really, really high-priced defensive lineman, and it's not like your tight end makes nothing, like, you got some guys you're paying a lot of money. Draft picks are pretty valuable to you. So when I saw that the Commanders were willing to trade a third and a fourth round pick for Lattimore, I could see the Chiefs going, well, because he's been good this year. And hell, from what I heard, he was good against the Chiefs. But those picks to the Chiefs, when I do have some question marks on the player, and listen, could we use them? Of course. But we have other good DBs right now, and our defense is pretty damn good. But those picks to us, given how much we pay some of the veterans on our team, starting with the quarterback, matter a lot. So this better be a very, very low-risk trade. Or if you look at the Commanders, they have more room for risk because their quarterback makes nothing. So for the next 4 years, their quarterback's contract salary cap hit is nothing compared to all these other teams that have guys like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, etc., Dak Prescott. So I do think they can look at it a little differently. I still think there is a lot of risk to this trade, right? You're giving up pretty valuable assets on a team that obviously has been a sensational story, but we're going to learn a lot about you over the next 8 days. Like, it's not inconceivable that they lose their next 2 games. And you're going here after you lose the Steelers, after you lose the Eagles, you're like, listen, we're still going to be a wild card team. There's nothing wrong with that. We're going to win 10 plus games for the first time in who knows how long. And honestly, since that year, RG3's rookie year, it's the most hope, the brightest future, and most normal this franchise has felt in decades. So to get aggressive, like, sometimes you live in the moment, and I'm all for it. It's going to be awfully interesting to see how this works out. It really is. Like, what they traded for him, where they're at, going one and done in the playoffs would sting. Now, you could argue this isn't even just about right now. They're trading those assets to have this guy under contract on their team for the next couple of years, which to me, it all comes down to health. If he's healthy and on the field, the risk for a team that has a bunch of salary cap space, I get it. But I think anytime that you trade for some of these injured guys or guys that have battled injuries, you just never know, man. You just never know. So Adam Peters is getting aggressive. I don't think any Washington fan is going to complain about that. But this isn't like a controversial trade like the Cowboys. But it is just risky in that, like, are we sure this year's the year? Like, I think what you guys have been doing has been outstanding and overachieving on a really, really high level. But it's hard for me to have some strong judgment on you till I watch you play the Steelers and the Eagles in a 5-day stretch. Play on Sunday, then you play on Thursday night. So we'll know a lot about you after those couple games. The NFL season is rolling along, and contenders are separating from the pack. The one thing that hasn't changed this season, DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. I love doing it. Touchdown passes, touchdown runs, long runs, the tush push. Well, not today. You name it, they will do it. Bet on touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something as simple like a player scoring a touchdown. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. I do it every day in the office watching football. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings app today and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets. If your bet wins, you win. Bet just $5. only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. I think the Lions were in a tough spot because within the last week, maybe week and a half, Mark Davis tells the guys at ESPN, under no circumstances, I'm trading Max Crosby. Now, I think some people would be like, he wants to take all the leverage to his team. And if you even want this guy, I'm going to need like 2 1s, 2 2s, and a couple players or something. I think he might have just been speaking like, yeah, under no circumstances am I trading Max Crosby. I've done this before with Khalil Mack, and it was the worst decision we ever made. So we're not doing it now. I'm watching Khalil Mack right now with the Chargers. He looks like he's 25 again. He looks fantastic. So I get it. Like, if I was Mark Davis, I probably would have put him on the block, even if I ended up not trading him, but just truly see how much we could get. Like, I would have gone, listen, we have no desire to trade this player, but at the current state of our franchise, which is a disaster, we would be, it'd be gross negligence to not listen to offers. But your offer, even to get us to listen, better blow us the fuck away. If you do not, don't waste your time calling. If your offer is going to be just the 2025 draft picks, hang up the phone. Don't waste our time. But if you're going to go to multiple drafts with really, really high picks, like, yeah, listen, this is business. We'll listen. And he kind of shot that down. So I thought Max Crosby and the Lions would have made a ton of sense, but it takes 2 to tango. Not available. I get it. And so they trade for Za'Darius Smith, who has had a fantastic career. He really has. And still, he has 5 sacks this year. Still a solid player. Obviously, if you're talking to the Cleveland Browns, you are discussing Myles Garrett. But a little bit like the Raiders, the whole point of drafts and the whole point of acquiring players is to get those guys. Even though both franchises are in shambles and you have to listen, I do understand being on the Raiders or Brown side, being like, even if we get a couple number ones and we trade them to the Lions, well, if they're good the next couple years, those picks are 30 and 31. What does that do for us? Like, I do get the other side, even though if I can get multiple 1s and multiple 2s and my franchise just sucks, I just have to entertain it. Clearly, they're saying no. And who knows? Were the Lions even willing to get that aggressive? I mean, this is, you look around the NFC, it's never going to be more open. It just never is. I mean, the 49ers, even if they start coming, still have issues. I mean, Brandon Ayuk has a messed up knee, is gone for the season. So he was a key player in beating them last year. And the 49ers making a playoff run. I mean, he was one of their better offensive weapons. Obviously, the question marks are Christian McCaffrey. We just saw you beat the shit out of the Packers. Like, I'm sorry, Minnesota is just not beating the Lions in Detroit in a playoff game. You know, Philly, it's like Sirianni feels like the poor man's version of Dan Campbell. But, I mean, we're going to learn a lot about them here over the next couple of weeks. I mean, they play the Commanders on next Thursday, so they win that. Like, they'll clearly be headed toward, you know, a home playoff game and winning that division. But, like, it does feel like the NFC's been pretty good the last couple of years. And right now it feels like, yeah, it's pretty wide open. And if you're the Lions, you feel like you're going to be the heavy favorite to win this thing. So you can't control a guy getting injured. That sucked. And I heard someone talking about this. They're actually kind of lucky that it was such a clean leg break, that it's not ligaments, no ACLs or PCLs. Like, it's just a clean break. Like, there's a lot of buzz because of how just, this is a broken leg, even though it looked really bad. Like, if all goes well, he could be back for the Super Bowl. So if Za'Darius can just hold them over, clearly they just have, you talk about elite team chemistry. That's what they feel like. So it's been awesome to watch this turnaround. I've talked about it before. I don't even think we are like over. I don't think you can overstate how incredible turning around the Detroit Lions and turning them into a dominant football team is. Like that. If you would have told people over the last 30 years that would ever happen, nobody would believe you. Not a soul. Especially in a division like and you're like, oh yeah, the Packers are still good. It'd be one thing if like, the Packers, they finally whiffed on a quarterback, no offense, franchise in shambles. Oh yeah, Minnesota. They suck too. They've turned into the Raiders of the cold, and the Bears are the same old Bears. But it's like, no, actually, the Bears are in shambles, and they're actually still pretty talented. Minnesota and the Packers are playoff teams. It's like, yeah, we're the best team in football. You'd be like, damn, they got to be really good. And last but not least, team I want to hit on was the Steelers, who I'm telling you, it was funny. I had McAfee on my extra, I got my laptop here that I'm talking into, but I also have like the external monitor, a big one that looks like a little TV. And sometimes, I'll just drag Colin or McAfee or whatever, depending on, who they're talking to or what time it is. And I saw Rogers was on with McAfee, so I flipped it on. And then they're like, breaking news as Rogers is sitting there getting asked questions. Your teammate has just been traded. And he looked like, oh yeah, good for him. It's be nice to get a fresh start. It's like, yeah, he does not give a shit. I mean, very awkward, really is. And that's what happens when you just have a team full of mercenaries. And that's what the Jets were. And I didn't quite realize this, but a bunch of people reported on this. Mike Williams basically chose, it came down between the Jets and the Steelers, and he chose the Jets, which obviously, in looking back, retrospect, was a mistake. If he could do that over again, he just would have gone to the Steelers. But he showed a little life last week on that Thursday night game against the Texans. Like, it's not like he's totally shot. He clearly is nowhere what he once was pre the injuries. But they gave up the fifth for him. You put him and Pickens, big body, just throw deep balls, let them go get 50-50 balls. I mean, that's kind of how Russell plays. Play great defense, have TJ be the defensive player of the year, have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren run their ass off, and you got a tough team, man. I mean, I watched the Ravens, who traded for a corner today, Tre'Davious White from the Rams, who I don't know how good he is at this point in time. I mean, he went for a seventh round pick. So if you're a decent corner, in this league, I think it's the writing's kind of on the wall, but I don't blame them. I mean, they're pretty desperate right now. It's hard for me to watch the Ravens and watch the Steelers and think the Steelers are going to win that division, but the Ravens have dropped some stupid games, and the Steelers beat Washington this week. Their defense, their pass rush is just so excellent, and let's face it, Russ has given them definitely more offensive life because the passing game is much more, it's just higher level in the fact that they can push the ball down the field. Pickens is alive now. And yeah, if I was a Steelers fan, I'd be pretty excited. I think we can temper enthusiasm to, like, we're not winning the Super Bowl, but like shit, we could win the division, we could win a playoff game. Like this is a lot better than what has been in recent memory. So I think spirits should be really high, and the Steelers just kind of stay aggressive. I was watching Florio on my YouTube homepage. He came up him talking with Dan Patrick about William Belichick, and obviously, the Cowboys are going to come open. I don't think anyone thinks that Bill's going to go coach with Jerry and Dak. The Eagles situation is a pretty big wild card. To me, if that job opens, I would imagine Bill Belichick is the next coach of the Eagles. But who knows? I mean, what if Sirianni's in the NFC Championship game, which is very plausible. The Jags, everyone keeps connecting that, but like Bill Belichick is going to coach the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence, who is got to be one of the most overpaid professional athletes we've ever seen. And we've seen a lot of them, especially if you're my age in my adult life, given how much the explosion of money, these 100, 200, $300 million contracts in the NBA and baseball. I mean, we have seen some disasters. In football, it's a lot like less prevalent because most of these contracts aren't fully guaranteed and I can usually get out of it. But now we've seen some quarterback contracts, Russell Wilson in Denver, and what we're seeing, Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, and now this one in Jacksonville. So I like the guy that I just witnessed on that final drive against the Eagles. Like that's who Bill is going to just sign up for the last couple of years of his adult coaching life. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing it. I have seen some people like, would the Raiders be interested? I don't know if the Raiders make that much sense. And listen, maybe I'm assuming, and you know what they say about that. It makes an ass out of you and me. But I assume that Bill Belichick's offensive coordinator is going to be Josh McDaniels, right? That's the guy he had all his success with. He's available. He's not going to be a head coach. Like wherever Bill goes, his offensive coordinator is going to be Josh. Well, the Raiders' job, Josh McDaniels is not going to be the offensive coordinator there. Even if by the time he went back, it'd be all brand new players. That ain't happening. And I also wonder, like Tom Brady, Mark Davis, a lot of people think, and myself included, that Tom is going to have a much more influential role moving forward. It's fair to say Antonio Pierce is not just coaching for his job, but it's probably screwed. Like he's probably going to get fired. It is looks like another Raider season, which tends to be a disaster. I do wonder if Mike Vrabel makes more sense there because he's not tied to Josh McDaniels. He can bring any offensive coordinator he wants. That is kind of Tom's guy. Like they are clearly very good buddies. And all Mark Davis wants is to have a cool coach who's good. He tried it with Gruden, and whoever leaked those emails fucked him, and he had to fire him. And obviously, Mark didn't want to do it. Deuce Gruden's still on the staff. He tried to strike oil again with Josh McDaniels, and a year and a half later, Max Crosby and Devontae Adams begged him to fire him over dinner, and he did. And he doesn't want to have these interim random coaches. He wants a coaching star. It's Vegas. It's a bright light place. It's a city of stars. And I think Mike Vrabel is probably as good as they can do. Now, would he be interested? Money would have to talk. I mean, part of the reason this story about them firing their coaching staff, which is pretty unheard of, firing 3 coaches in November, especially the OC, the quarterback coach, and the O-line coach. Like that's more than just mixing something up. That's like cleaning house in the middle of the season, especially when the head coach is a defensive guy. Now, I understand they bring in Norv Turner off the couch, but it's a little bit easier for a player like a Flacco to come off the couch and start playing than it is to me for a coach to come off the couch and start coaching. But we'll see. I don't expect anything to change. I do just wonder if Brady tries to make the big pitch to bring in Mike Vrabel and, connect him with, I don't know exactly know if Telesco might get fired too. It'd be Mark paying a lot of people. I mean, one thing Mark does have now that like all these other owners have that fire coaches constantly is just unlimited wealth. It's why these teams fire guys now after 1 or 2 years without hesitation because if they think the guy sucks, it really doesn't change their life at all or their team's operating procedures. Paying a guy $10 million to go away, it does not matter. It really does. It used to. It mattered forever. It's why so many coaches in the history of sports that the owner had turned on probably got an extra year because they were under contract. They didn't want to pay him to go away. Those days are over once the NFL money's become monopoly money where it's all fake. Well, it's not fake because it's really in their bank accounts, but like it's so much, it does not matter. And if Brady can convince them, I think Vrabel might be a name to keep an eye on, assuming he'd even, be interested. But if I was a Raider fan, like that would be much better than the alternative. Okay, let's go on campus. College football has been fantastic this year. It really has. I have watched probably more college football start to finish on Saturdays this season than I have in a long time. And I've watched. I mean, I'm a diehard college football guy, but I feel like I've watched, and maybe it's because YouTube TV has the 4 boxes, so it feels like it's easier to kind of keep up with more teams than you would used to. I don't just have to I'm just watching the best game, which you're gonna do no matter what. Like Ohio State's playing Penn State, you're gonna watch it, right? Alabama's playing LSU, you're gonna watch it. I just end up watching like Iowa State, K State, some of these random games. I do think the 4 boxes changed the game. And props to YouTube TV for creating that because it was desperately needed. But let's Colin and I mentioned this. Well, he brought it up because he's a USC guy. There's no disputing this is an epic disaster. It really is. I mean, they paid the guy $120 million. I remember texting my guy at Oklahoma back when the rumor started growing. I'm like, do you think he's going to leave? He's like, no, he just built a multi-million-dollar mansion in Norman, Oklahoma. And this is not Scottsdale or Vegas or LA, where it's like people are you're gonna have a lot of options to sell. He's like, he wouldn't even be able to unload it. And what did SC do as part of the deal to sign Lincoln Riley? They not only bought the house from him, they paid 500 grand over asking price. They had so much money. They're like, they were going to make that deal impossible in the history of human beings, even if Lincoln wanted no part of moving to LA with his family, given small town Texas kid, had been at Oklahoma and crushing it. It was one of those offers that he couldn't refuse. I would have taken it. You would have taken it. We all would have taken it. Because it's one of those that gets presented to you. You cannot say no. And he didn't. Even though, and I'll believe this to my core, I never thought it was a good fit. I never thought it made any sense. Because regionality in college football matters. Where you're from and where you coach means a lot. There are outliers. Urban Meyer was not a dude from the South, from Ohio, but he crushed it at Florida. He's one of the better college coaches in the history of the sport. I love it when I hear Saban, he wasn't from the dirty South. It's like, yeah, he's from West Virginia. Like, to me, Saban, I give Saban having success at LSU and Alabama, like his personality fits right in. So when I see Lincoln Riley struggling, I didn't expect it. I didn't think it was going to work in the sense of he was going to be the next Nick Saban or Urban Meyer at SC or do what Pete Carroll did. But I thought his team would win 8-9 games every year. They're 4-5. They are 4-5. And it was reported today that they're benching Miller Moss for the backup some UNLV transfer. If you would have told me after the first couple weeks, like, I understand Utah State's not very good, but playing LSU in Vegas and then beating the shit out of Utah State, Miller Moss looks good, that this team would be 4-5, I would have said there would have to be a tragedy or something that happened to the football team that just derails their season. But they just play bad. They're just not very good. And you can't fake toughness. And Lincoln Riley clearly is not a good enough recruiter, and their ability at SC to buy guys in the NIL to overcome that. Like Ryan Day and Sark, I don't consider tough guys either. Relative, this is relative to football coaches. Like Kirby Smart is a tough guy. Nick Saban was a tough guy. Urban Meyer, tough guy. But they can buy the defense. And you're watching USC, it's like, are we buying and on the right guys? Do you have any clue what you're looking for? I just don't know how this ends. But if you were a betting man right now, you would say this is not going to end very well. You can't pay someone $120 million. And by the third year, in a world where there's transfer portals, meaning you can get guys brand new every year, you can force shitty players out immediately. You can turn over your roster like that. Brian Kelly, I said this when Lincoln was trying to get out of the Brian Kelly LSU game. I said, you're at the same spot he is. Year 3, you have new coordinators, you have a new quarterback. This isn't 10 years ago where you needed 3 or 4 years just to get your recruiting classes in the mix. Those days are over. You should be able to flip it like that. And you shouldn't get dramatically worse over time. And you went 7-5 last year. What's he going to go this year? 6-6? Because at this point in time, like, it doesn't even matter. He's already failed. Well, momentum is such a big deal in 2025 with the way kids are on social media, with the hype train of like Ohio State and Georgia and Bama and LSU and Texas A&M. Like, these programs feel cool. It's one thing Florida has really battled. Like, they just haven't felt cool in a long time. You can say that sounds juvenile, but that's who you're talking to. 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And there's just this negative perception, or Oregon's a great example. They've been cool for 20 plus years, but they really feel like one of the it programs. Like, that's where I want to be. If I was a kid in California, and listen, Oregon has always recruited well in California. When I was a kid, they were coming to Sacramento and getting the best players. Ontario Smith was one of the best running backs in California. He went to Oregon. Remember the Whizzinator? That's a fake dick that he used to piss to get away from the piss test and got caught. Funny story, but Ontario Smith was sweet. My point is, like, they're just falling behind and they're getting lapped fast. So I don't know what the end game is beside, like, I don't think this is ever going to work. And I think it's a good example of most of us will just never get an offer. One of those offers where someone knocks on your door, you have $1 million house, and they offer you $10 million. You're like, I don't want to move. I have no desire to move. Moving sounds like the worst thing humanly imaginable right now. My family loves it here, but we got to take your money. Like, we don't have a choice. Like, I'll move out tonight. And that's what it feels like. Like, he didn't want to move. He didn't want to leave. And now he's at a place where he doesn't relate to. Culturally, it's not his people or his family's people. And it's also a program that needs a lot of work. And he was never exactly a guy that built it from the ground up. Like, that's Brian Kelly, what he does. He can go to a place that's in shambles and build it from scratch. Lincoln took over something that was kind of humming. And a lot like Chip Kelly took it to the next level, right? But the Oregon Chip Kelly inherited wasn't like a 4 or 5 win team. They were top 25 every year. He just turned them into top 5 or 6 every year. But they were already, like, most years, like 17th, 14th, 19th. Like, they were good. NFL draft picks everywhere. It's why as Chip's career went on, like, got a little harder. Like, what he did at Oregon was awesome, but they weren't some joke that he turned into a power. They were a damn good program that he turned into a power. That's what Lincoln did as well. Damn good program that had stagnated a little bit, but was always in the top 25, that he then turned into top 5 or 6. And he also benefited because Texas was really down during that time. Speaking of Oregon, like, they've never won a national championship. Like, when you think about the teams they're competing against, Ohio State, several-time national champion in my life. Georgia, 1-2 in like the last 5 years. You know, if LSU were to make it to the playoffs, they've had 3 national championships in the last 20 years with 3 different coaches. Texas, like, they won a national championship when I was a junior or senior in college in one of the great games we've ever seen. And they went back to another 3 or 4 years later with Mac Brown when Colt got hurt and Alabama beat him. And I think a lot of people, I think they were favored in that game, if I remember correctly, when he hurt his shoulder. Might be their time. It really might, because when you look at college football, like, I think Ohio State's pretty good. And I think they're going to be a mother to beat. And I would say the same thing about Georgia. But I go, do I totally trust Ryan Day? I just don't. And when I look at Georgia, like, do I trust their quarterback? Hell no, I don't. And I would say the same thing about Texas. Like, I just don't trust their quarterback. So I look at Oregon, I go, quarterback's pretty damn good. Their team, top to bottom, especially the way they're playing post Ohio State, is probably playing the best in the country. And then they just have a coach, while he's never done it as a head coach, had a front row seat as the right-hand man for Kirby Smart. So knows what it takes to win natties. Remember, when Kirby got the job at Georgia, took him a little while, but what did he know? He knew the secret sauce because he sat right next to Nick for a decade plus and watched them build that thing from scratch. I think it'd be pretty cool. In a day and age where we have these same consistent powers, now that Miami's back, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, it's like all these teams have won natties. Oregon is the one team that has consistently been in the conversation that hasn't. And they've been to a couple, and it didn't go their way, right? Didn't go their way at all. Obviously, they got housed by Ohio State when Mariota was playing. That game did not go well. And I don't vividly remember the game, but the game that they lost to Auburn against, was that Cam Newton in 2011? Or was that the year? Yeah, it would have been. Was it Cam Newton or the year before? Cam Newton won a national championship? Pretty sure he did. Now I'm getting my dates messed up, but I'm rooting for Oregon to win the whole thing. Bama at LSU. This is our first, like, playoff game. Like, whoever loses this game is out. If Bama loses this game, they're done. If LSU loses this game, they're done. And whoever wins this game, look at their schedules, is going to be in the playoffs. Now, they're going to be the 11th or 12th seed, but they're a playoff team. And if I tell you, and this is what's so awesome about the playoffs, if like, let's say Ohio State or Oregon, if they lose to Ohio State in the conference title game, is the 5th seed. If you're Oregon and you lose one game, you lose on a walk-off field goal to Ohio State, and you're seed 5. And in the first round, you get LSU or Bama. Well, I mean, that kind of sucks. It's like the Ravens or the Steelers. This year, they go 13-4. And in the first round, you get Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. Like, what the fuck? Right? How does that happen? Well, I do think that I think whoever wins this game, and I think LSU is going to win. It's going to be at LSU. Remember a couple years ago, I think it was Brian Kelly's first year, they beat the Saban team on that walk-off touchdown. I think this is probably your 12th seed because I think when the dust settles, if Boise wins out, they might be the 9 or 10. I think everyone just pigeonholed whoever the like power 4 team was to make the playoffs being the 12th seed. I could see Boise. They lost to Oregon by 3 points at Eugene, being a little higher than people realize. And last but not least, I wanted Nebraska to be good. And that was the second game of the season when they played Colorado, who now, if Colorado runs the table, Colorado would be a playoff team. Think how incredible that is. That Colorado would be a playoff team. That's on the table right now. But, I almost lost my train of thought. Nebraska played Colorado. I remember watching that game. I think it was week 2. And they just beat the brakes off them. And Colorado looked like they were headed toward a 3 or 4 win season. It's like, this is a completely different world. And as the season has gone on, their offense has looked like shit. And this happens a lot. It happens in the pros and it happens in college football. When we anoint a guy, this guy was the number 1 overall pick. This guy was a 5-star guy that we just gave $5 million to. It's kind of cool that we can just admit that. For a long time, we had to pretend like they're just really good recruiters. Yeah, and they also gave him a brown bag and a car and a home for his parents. Like, and a job for his sister, and then funneled some money some other places. Now it's like, yeah, he's got millions of dollars. It's a much healthier environment that we can just openly talk about it. But the Dominic Raiola experience has been a lot more down than up. And I know everyone, and I was probably guilty of this too, was like, the next Patrick Mahomes. This dude is Patrick Mahomes. It's like, well, I'm watching Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is like the way better version of Brett Favre, who is a top 10 quarterback of all time, Super Bowl champion, 3-time MVP. So if this guy's going to be compared to Patrick Mahomes just because he wears some cool shades, let's make sure he can play football. And right now he can't. And offensively, Nebraska is near the bottom as an offense in rushing and passing in the Big Ten, which isn't exactly the most potent offensive conference. So today they hired Dana Holgorsen, who once upon a time was like one of Leach's right-hand guys, became known as an offensive guru, ended up becoming Gundy's offensive coordinator in 2010, and becoming like known as an offensive wizard. Goes to West Virginia and then coaches at Houston. And they have just hired him as a consultant, which I would, if I had to take an educated guess, it wouldn't shock me if they make a coordinator change this offseason because you can't pay the quarterback this much money. It happens in pros. Why is Eberflus and everyone going to get fired in Chicago? It's not the defense. Defense is fine. It's because Caleb sucks. And Caleb is not allowed to suck. Now, as time goes on, maybe he wasn't as good as the hype, but that will get people fired. Like several people fired. Look how many people Trevor Lawrence is getting fired. It happens. It's part of the deal. And if you're Matt Rule, if you want to have success, you have to make this quarterback good. And you're not exactly offensive mastermind. So you bring in a guy, maybe spread the offense out a little bit. Think about Patrick Mahomes. What did he do in college? Played in an air raid offense under Cliff Kingsbury. Well, what's Cliff Kingsbury? His background, Mike Leach, Texas Tech, who was, as a player, Who was one of his wide receiver and offensive coordinator and quarterback coach? Dana Holgorsen. So I think this is an easy offense to get success with your quarterback. It makes everything easier. And you could argue nobody is underachieving more based on the hype for 6 months than the Nebraska quarterback. And that's on Matt Rule to figure that out. So I like this move a lot.